The doorbell rang just as I was finishing my second cup of coffee. The morning had been slow, quiet, just the way I liked it when my husband was out. No distractions, no obligations. Just me, the steady hum of the dishwasher, and the warmth of the sun filtering through the kitchen window. I took my time walking to the door, enjoying the brief moment of solitude before facing the world outside. When I finally pulled it open, the delivery guy was standing there, bags in hand, his broad frame blocking the sunlight from streaming into the house. "Morning," he said, his voice easy, casual. "Didn't think you'd answer so slow." I arched a brow, leaning against the door frame. "Didn't think you'd get here so fast." His lips quirked. "Guess I'm just efficient like that." I let my eyes flicker over him, taking in the way his uniform fit just a little too well, the way his arms flexed under the weight of the bags. He was younger than I had expected, mid-20s maybe. Confident. Comfortable in his own skin. "You want to bring those in?" I asked, stepping back slightly. He hesitated just long enough for me to notice, his gaze flicking past me, into the house. "Sure." I watched as he stepped inside, his movements fluid, natural. The way he carried himself, the way his eyes scanned the space as if he was taking in more than just the layout of the house, it didn't go unnoticed. "You get deliveries often?" he asked, setting the bags down on the kitchen island. I shrugged, closing the door behind him. "Only when I need something." His smirk deepened. "And today, you needed groceries." I tilted my head slightly, meeting his gaze. "Among other things." A beat passed. The air between us shifted, the casual banter taking on a new weight. He didn't look away. Neither did I. His fingers drummed lightly against the countertop, his body still, but his stance relaxed. "Well," he said, leaning his palms against the counter, his voice lower now, smoother. "I make pretty good deals." I let out a slow breath, a quiet thrill curling in my stomach. "Do you know?" I murmured. He nodded, his eyes scanning me with an intensity that sent a ripple of heat up my spine. "Depends on what you're looking for." The room felt smaller suddenly, the morning's quietness replaced by something else entirely. The air between us grew heavier, thick with an unspoken challenge neither of us was willing to name just yet. I took a slow step forward, watching the way his jaw flexed, the way his fingers gripped the counter just a little tighter. Maybe I just like to test the quality before I commit. His smirk deepened, his stance shifting ever so slightly. Smart. Wouldn't want to take home something that doesn't meet expectations. The warmth of the sun streaming through the window did little to match the heat curling low in my stomach. I knew this game. I had played it before, but this time, something about it felt different. He reached for one of the bags, pulling out an item and setting it down on the counter. "You like fresh produce?" I raised a brow, amused. "Is that part of the deal?" His gaze flickered up to mine, sharp, unreadable. "Could be." My pulse quickened, the space between us evaporating by the second. I should have stepped back, should have broken the tension with a laugh or a change of subject. But I didn't. Instead, I leaned against the counter, my fingers tracing idle circles on the cool surface. "And what do I owe you for this service?" His tongue flicked over his bottom lip, his smirk slow and deliberate. "That depends on what you're willing to offer." The unspoken agreement hung between us, a quiet dare neither of us was willing to break first. The sound of the clock ticking on the wall suddenly felt too loud, every second stretching longer than it should have. "You drive a hard bargain," I murmured, tilting my head. He exhaled a quiet chuckle, his voice lower now. "Only when the stakes are high." And just like that, the morning was no longer slow or quiet at all. The weight of his gaze settled over me like a challenge, like he was daring me to be the one to break the tension first. But I didn't. I let it build, let the silence stretch, knowing full well that neither of us was willing to step away from whatever this was. His fingers flexed against the counter, his body still, but the energy between us pulsed with something I wasn't sure either of us could ignore anymore. There was an unspoken current running between us, something neither of us acknowledged, but both felt deep in our bones. "You keep looking at me like that," he murmured, his voice dropping just slightly, thick with something unspoken, "and I might start thinking this deal is about more than groceries." I tilted my head, dragging my fingernail along the counter, watching the way his jaw flexed. Maybe it is. His smirk was slow, knowing. Then I'd say you're getting a hell of a bargain. The space between us was practically non-existent now. He smelled like fresh air and something faintly sharp, like he had spent the morning outside, the sun clinging to his skin. The warmth of him radiated against me, an unspoken pull that neither of us was fighting anymore. His hand lifted, slow, deliberate. Just a whisper of contact, his fingertips ghosting along the inside of my wrist, barely there, but enough to send a ripple of heat through me. My breath hitched, but I didn't pull away. I let the moment stretch, let the slow, deliberate anticipation build between us. "You're not the type to back out of a deal, are you?" he murmured. I exhaled, my lips parting slightly. "Depends on the offer." His fingers traced a slow path up my arm, the heat of his touch lingering long after his skin left mine. He was testing me, waiting for the moment I'd stop this, waiting for the moment I'd hesitate. But I didn't. I leaned in slightly, just enough for my breath to mix with his, just enough for the tension to coil tighter between us. "And what exactly are you offering?" His smirk widened, but there was something else in his eyes now, something darker, something restrained. "Something I don't think you've had in a while." A slow hum left my lips, my fingers tracing the edge of the counter. "And you'd be sure of that?" His hand moved again, this time grazing along my waist, barely there, but enough. "I've got good instincts." I swallowed, my pulse hammering in my ears. The moment stretched, thick and electric, every second longer than the last. I knew this was crossing a line. But the thrill of it, the undeniable temptation, was impossible to ignore. He leaned in slightly, his breath warm against my skin. "Tell me to go." I didn't. Instead, I let my fingers brush over his forearm, barely touching, but enough to make my decision clear. His grip tightened, just slightly, his body going still for a fraction of a second before he exhaled, slow and controlled. His hand slid a fraction lower, his touch firmer now, no longer questioning, no longer uncertain. The weight of the decision settled over both of us, tangible, undeniable. There was no going back now. He took a slow step closer, our bodies almost brushing, the heat between us impossible to ignore. "You sure about this?" I lifted my chin, meeting his gaze without hesitation. I wouldn't have let it go this far if I wasn't. His smirk deepened, but there was something else beneath it now, something raw, something unguarded. "Guess that makes two of us." His fingers moved against my waist again, the pressure heavier this time, deliberate. My breath caught, my body responding before my mind could catch up. It wasn't just the thrill of the moment, the forbidden nature of it, it was the way he looked at me, like he had been waiting for this as long as I had, like he knew exactly how dangerous this was and didn't care. His other hand lifted, his fingers grazing along the side of my neck, slow, controlled, testing. "Still think this is just a deal?" I let out a quiet breath, my lashes lowering slightly. "No, not anymore." His thumb brushed against my skin, a barely there caress that sent a shiver down my spine. Good. The world outside didn't matter anymore. The sound of the clock ticking on the wall, the faint hum of the refrigerator, everything else faded. The only thing that existed was this, the unspoken agreement between us, the certainty that whatever happened next had already been decided long before either of us spoke a word. And as his fingers tightened just slightly against my skin, as his breath mixed with mine in the charged air between us, I knew. This was far more than just a deal. This was inevitable.